The next animation principle we'll look at is staging. If you want to follow along, we're in 0203 Staging AEP. If you have access to the exercise files, you can open that and follow along with us. So staging your animation is also referred to as setting the scene, and it involves attracting the viewer's attention and focusing it on a particular subject or area of the screen before the action takes place. You'll see here I've got quite a complicated composition, and it has the word staging in it. As I said before, I ask my students to animate words that I give them, and sometimes I give them the principles of animation like staging, anticipation, and ask them to animate them. And of course I wouldn't ask them to do anything I don't want to do myself, so I've created this little animation here which shows the principle of staging. So if we have a look at it first, you'll see a spotlight comes on telling us something's about to happen, the curtains open, and then we have the word staging, which is dancing around. And by using cliches like curtains and spotlights, we know that something dramatic is about to happen. So we'll look at that once more, and then we'll talk through why this is important. So staging is really important because, as I said, it allows you to attract the viewer's attention. You also have to remember that the viewers don't have the luxury of knowing what's about to happen in your animation. So if we just went straight to staging and had the dancing happening, we might be thinking, well, should we be looking here? Or if there was something moving up here, should we be looking there? But by having the spotlight and the curtains opening, we know exactly where we should be looking. Now in this situation, it's fairly central to the screen anyway, and people will generally look in the middle of the screen unless you lead their eye somewhere else. But if you wanted them to look up here, it's important that you grab their attention before you animate something over here. If something moves really quickly, they might not have enough time to realize what's going on. If they blink, they might miss it. And that's why it's necessary to set the scene for them. People will enjoy your animation much more if their eyes are guided and given time to appreciate it. So let's just play that again. So that draws us to the center of the screen, the curtains open to give it a bit more drama, and there we see them dancing. It can also set up a mood or feeling, and the light and the curtains give that feeling of drama. They also give a feeling of coziness. It allows the viewer to understand that this is going to be entertaining and dramatic because I've used curtains and a spotlight. So that's generally used in a theatre, which would denote being entertaining or dramatic. Other examples that you can use to create staging would be having a subject move suddenly to attract attention. You can use colouring. You could have a different colour in a particular area, or as I've done here, you can use lighting in such a way that that area stands out from the rest of the scene. Or you can use music or sound effects to capture attention. You can even have, you know, kind of cliched things like arrows pointing and things like that. So have a little think about how you can stage your animations to make sure that the viewer's looking at the correct part of the scene before the action takes place. Now, we mentioned earlier on the arc of a ball. So if a ball's being thrown from the left, it has left to right directional force from the person who's throwing and is also affected by gravity. The further the ball travels to the right, the nearer it will get to the ground. So when the two forces are combined, it produces a curved path known as an arc, and that's caused by two forces acting against each other. Now, the shape of the arc will depend on how strong the throw force is compared to the gravity force, which under normal circumstances remains constant. So we need to consider how hard is this ball being thrown, what direction is it thrown in, what height is it thrown from, and only after you've considered those factors will you be able to create a believable arc for it to travel along. You then need to decide how it will bounce, and that's not only affected by the weight or mass of the object, which we'll have a look at later, but also by the damping force, which we've spoken about already, of the object it hits when it bounces. So we've got the ball coming in here from the top left, and then it's hitting the ground. Now, I've removed any other keyframes just to make it a little bit easier. So what we're going to do is move ahead a few frames. Now, I'm not really being precise at the moment. I've moved to 113. And then what I'm going to do is just move the ball. Okay, now I could do it up in this view by just dragging the ball, which is fine. And I'm holding down Shift just to constrain it so it doesn't go below the floor. Or you could move the values down here in the timeline. I'm then going to move it ahead a little bit less this time, because as it moves, the arc will get smaller and smaller. So I'm going to move it across again, holding down Shift. And you'll notice now we haven't got an arc. Okay, we'll talk about that in a second. And then we'll move it ahead a little bit more and just move it again. And then again, maybe just there. And we'll move it to there. Okay, so what we've got now is the ball comes in, it bounces once, and then it slides out, which isn't very good. Okay, we've got the bounce here, and the reason we have is because this keyframe was already a Bezier keyframe, which means that it will bounce, but this one's not. This one's linear, and that's why suddenly when we get to here, it just goes smooth. So what we're going to do is convert this first of all to Auto Bezier, and you can do that down here in the timeline. The only thing is it's very hard to see the handles, so I usually prefer to do it up here in the composition panel. Now you'll notice that I get the handles coming out, so it's now a continuous Bezier keyframe. If I click on that handle again, I can change the direction, so I'm getting a nice curve. So it's now going there, and then from there to there, and then we'll also drag a handle out from this one, so we've got a bounce coming into here. Now, I turned off my keyframe path in the preferences earlier. So what I'm going to do is go back to my display preferences and switch that back on to all keyframes so that I can see my entire path. So again, I'm using the Convert Vertex tool just to adjust the shape of the path as I move through the animation. Okay, so we'll have that one bouncing up and then this one at the end bouncing up. So we've now got a really nice arc, and we just need to go through and adjust it. So we want it to kind of be even on either side at each of these. Now, as it bounces, it will get lower. So each one should get progressively lower than the previous one. Okay, that's a little bit too high. So very quickly and easily, we've created our little bouncing ball. So it comes in from the side and then it bounces. Now, this one is looking a little bit too high for me, so I'm going to bring that down so that it's coming in kind of like that, which I think will look a little bit more believable. Yeah, that's better. Okay, so that's how you can think about the directional force and the gravity and work out how something should be bouncing. We'll have a look at how to improve this even further in the next tutorial. Anticipation is another principle of animation that can be used to direct the viewer's attention to part of the screen, and it's often intermingled with staging, which we looked at previously. However, there are differences that make it a rule unto itself. Now, if you want to follow along, we're in 0204 Anticipation. If you have access to the exercise files, you can open that file and follow along. Now, some anticipation occurs naturally. For example, if you imagine a mouse is about to hit a cat over the head with a mallet, the mouse has to physically pull the mallet back before plunging it down. And the pulling back of the mallet is the anticipation moment. By exaggerating that moment, you can let the viewer know what's about to happen in the scene before it happens. We're going to use the rules of anticipation here to make a text animation more interesting. Now, if I just move this text off the screen, it would be a quite boring animation, and I won't really have time to appreciate it. So what we're going to do is use some anticipation tricks that don't always happen in nature, but are useful in animation. Now, if you think back to the old Roadrunner cartoons where the coyote falls off the cliff, he kind of hangs in the air for a second or two before plummeting to the ground. Without dramatic pause, the viewer would not have time to register the coyote's very fast fall to earth. And these pauses are rare moments of stillness in animation, and they can be used to make an action really stand out. So if we watch what I've done here, rather than just have it move off the screen, what I've done is I've animated position, skew, tracking, and scale on this, and I've done it on a per character basis using text animators. So instead of just having it move forwards, so I'm going to have it moving off screen to the right, instead of just having it move forwards, what I've done is made it move backwards first. And as it does, it bunches together and skews and distorts. And then it holds there for a little while and then it goes off. Now, if we have a look at that in real time, you'll see that that just gives us a bit more time to read it and makes it more dynamic. As a rule of thumb with text, in order to work out how long you need to leave a piece of text on screen, you need to be able to read it 3 times out loud. And don't read it quickly, just read it as you would normally read it. So we're going to do that now when it starts playing. Anticipation, anticipation, anticipation. So you'll see there I was able to read it 3 times before it disappeared off the screen, which means even the slowest reader will have time to read that word before the animation takes place. Now that's a long time to have it left on screen doing nothing. So we're going to have a look at some other principles that you can apply to make that initial stage before the action takes place a little bit more interesting. Okay, so our ball is hitting the ground with more of a thud, but what we're going to do is add a little bit of a bounce in there. Now, objects will naturally bounce in real life, but we're going to exaggerate the bounce. Exaggeration is another principle of animation, and we're going to use it here. We're in 0304 Bounce project. If you have access to the exercise files, you can open that and follow along. So we could create a bounce here, but it's actually easier to create it in the value graph. So we're going to jump to the value graph and we're going to click on Auto Zoom Graph Height if that's not already selected. And you'll see here we're not moving on the x-axis, only moving on the y-axis. So what we're going to do to create our bounce is move a couple of frames forward from the end of the thud. And we're going to just adjust the Y position value. So I'm just going to scrub that value till the ball moves up in the air a little bit, probably about that much. Then we're going to move ahead 1 frame. Okay, so just 1 frame forwards. And then we're going to copy and paste this keyframe. Now we can do it in the graph editor. I can select that, hit Command C, Command V. If you're on Windows, obviously that's Control C, Control V. Now, if we have a look at the graph, it doesn't look that great. And if we have a look at our animation, it's not quite right. So what we're going to do is have a look at, first of all, the values and then the timing. Now, if we have a look at the graph, you'll see it's not the smoothest graph. It's not giving us a very nice, smooth graph. So what we're going to do is we're going to select this point here and we're going to right click on it and go to Keyframe Interpolation. And that opens up this dialog box here where we can choose what our temporal interpolation is and our spatial interpolation is. Now you'll notice that if I change that to linear and click on OK, you'll see that I get a much sharper point here. So it takes away that nasty curve that was in there, which was making the value change a little bit weirdly. Okay, the next thing we're going to do is have a look at this keyframe in the middle. This one here, what we want to do is we want to really have a nice curve here. So we're showing a nice even curve. Now it's quite hard to do that at the moment because we don't have any handles here. Notice as I select the points, I don't have any handles, so I can't adjust the shape of the curve. In order to do that, what I need to do is separate the dimensions. So at the moment, we've got X and Y dimension in one property called position. But if I right click and say separate dimensions, I now have a separate keyframe value for X and Y. And you'll notice that if I double click it, I get the free transform box appearing. I'm going to switch off free transform at the moment, but you'll notice that as I do, you see the handles for each of the keyframes. And if I click on this center keyframe for the Y value and then hold down Command and Alt to switch to the Convert Vertex tool, I can actually drag a handle out from there. I can also adjust this one as well. So if I really want to fine tune my bounce, I can use separate the dimensions and then it gives me these nice little handles so that I can really fine tune that and get it the way I want it. Let's just convert that back to linear. Now, obviously you can also use these tools here that will convert to auto Bezier, and then you could just drag the handles out. So that's an easier way of doing it. You just convert to auto Bezier and then you drag the handles out. And now if we have a look at that, you'll see we've got a much better bounce. Okay, now if you want to add a curve to this one, you can alt click on it to create the handles. And then if I want to keep this curve as it is, but I want to adjust this one, again, holding down Command and Alt toggles to the Convert Vertex tool. And of course, that's Control and Alt on Windows. And that allows you to adjust that point as well. So if you really need to get into a lot of detail, you can do. We can do the same here. Just pull the handle out, decide where it's going. Again, zooming in and out will help. Want to avoid handles crossing over like that. And we'll just pull that back down a little bit. Okay, so there we go. We've got a really nice bounce now. It's a little bit too high, so I'm going to just pull that back in. Okay, so we've got the bounce in the position we want. Now it's time to look at the timing of the bounce. Okay, so our ball is hitting the ground with more of a thud, but what we're going to do is add a little bit of a bounce in there. Now, objects will naturally bounce in real life, but we're going to exaggerate the bounce. Exaggeration is another principle of animation, and we're going to use it here. We're in 0304 Bounce project. If you have access to the exercise files, you can open that and follow along. So we could create a bounce here, but it's actually easier to create it in the value graph. So we're going to jump to the value graph. In this movie, we're going to have a look at one of the important animation principles, and that is to make your drawings or your artwork engaging. Now, I'm in 0202 Engaging AEP. If you want to follow along and you have access to the files, you can open that too. And here you'll see I've got the word engaging. One of the exercises that I give to my students is to animate words to do as they say. So I give them verbs usually, so things like run, and they'll make the text look like it's running, or bounce, they'll make it look like it's bouncing. It's a good exercise because if you can make an inanimate object look as if it's doing what you want to communicate, then that means that you're animating really well. So I gave myself the word engaging, and I thought, well, how can I make this engaging? How can I make it characterful? And I had a look at it, and the first thing that jumped out at me were the G's here. They look like, if you imagine them on their sides, looks like a pair of spectacles on its side. So I thought I'm going to make use of that. And in here, you'll see I've added quite a bit of animation. So you'll see that if I select these layers and then hit the U key, that's going to show you that I've animated the anchor point, position and scale on a scalar layer. We'll have a look at that later. That's a null object. And then on the pupils, I've got position and scale animated on those two. And then here on the text layer, which is I've converted to outlines, I've animated just the stroke width. So it's quite a simple animation really in terms of what I've animated. And what we're going to do is go back to the beginning and I'll show you what I've done. So I've started with a close-up of the letter G. And if we have a look at our keyframes here, you'll see that I've rotated the whole thing. And I've done that by using a null. All of these layers are attached to that null. So when I rotate the null, you'll notice that all the other layers follow. So I've rotated it around. I've placed pupils inside each of those. And you'll see there are the pupils. Let's just select these outlines and go up here to stroke and switch off the stroke. You'll see what I've done is placed a white stroke around the edges. And it has the effect of slimming down the edges just by applying a white stroke to the edges. That makes it look more like a pair of spectacles with eyes in. Okay, so the eyes blink a little bit, then they look surprised, and then it zooms out to reveal the word engaging. So engaging just means you're engaging with the character. So we know that the character is looking a bit worried because they're looking from side to side. Notice that when I'm moving the eyes, I'm not moving them in a straight line. I've moved them in a little arc, and we'll talk about arcs later, but it just makes it look a bit more interesting if it moves in a circle rather than just straight from side to side. Okay, then the eyes widen, so we're engaging in the fact that the character is scared, and then we come back to here. Now, I haven't spent too much time animating that. I've just used basic keyframes, basically linear and a few eases in there and some held keyframes. But I haven't really spent too much time going into the timing. But you'll notice that it really does help to make that word engaging. So think about making your characters, but also your objects engaging. You can make a box engaging by adding a little bit of a bounce to it. You can make a circle engaging by just having a little bit of follow through when it comes to a halt. And we'll have a look at all of those things a little bit later. In this movie, we're going to have a look at one of the important animation principles, and that is to make your drawings or your artwork engaging. Now, I'm in 0202 Engaging AEP. If you want to follow along and you have access to the files, you can open that too. And here you'll see I've got the word engaging. One of the exercises that I give to my students is to animate words to do as they say. So I give them verbs usually, so things like run, and they'll make the text look like it's running, or bounce, they'll make it look like it's bouncing. It's a good exercise because if you can make an inanimate object look as if it's doing what you want to communicate, then that means that you're animating really well. So I gave myself the word engaging, and I thought, well, how can I make this engaging? How can I make it characterful? And I had a look at it, and the first thing that jumped out at me were the G's here. They look like, if you imagine them on their sides, looks like a pair of spectacles on its side. So I thought I'm going to make use of that. And in here, you'll see I've added quite a bit of animation. So you'll see that if I select these layers and then hit the U key, that's going to show you that I've animated the anchor point, position and scale on a scalar layer. We'll have a look at that later. That's a null object. And then on the pupils, I've got position and scale animated on those two. And then here on the text layer, which is I've converted to outlines, I've animated just the stroke width. So it's quite a simple animation really in terms of what I've animated. And what we're going to do is go back to the beginning and I'll show you what I've done. So I've started with a close-up of the letter G. And if we have a look at our keyframes here, you'll see that I've rotated the whole thing. And I've done that by using a null. All of these layers are attached to that null. So when I rotate the null, you'll notice that all the other layers follow. So I've rotated it around. I've placed pupils inside each of those. And you'll see there are the pupils. Let's just select these outlines and go up here to stroke and switch off the stroke. You'll see what I've done is placed a white stroke around the edges. And it has the effect of slimming down the edges just by applying a white stroke to the edges. That makes it look more like a pair of spectacles with eyes in. Okay, so the eyes blink a little bit, then they look surprised, and then it zooms out to reveal the word engaging. So engaging just means you're engaging with the character. So we know that the character is looking a bit worried because they're looking from side to side. Notice that when I'm moving the eyes, I'm not moving them in a straight line. I've moved them in a little arc, and we'll talk about arcs later, but it just makes it look a bit more interesting if it moves in a circle rather than just straight from side to side. Okay, then the eyes widen, so we're engaging in the fact that the character is scared, and then we come back to here. Now, I haven't spent too much time animating that. I've just used basic keyframes, basically linear and a few eases in there and some held keyframes. But I haven't really spent too much time going into the timing. But you'll notice that it really does help to make that word engaging. So think about making your characters but also your objects engaging. You can make a box engaging by adding a little bit of a bounce to it. You can make a circle engaging by just having a little bit of follow through when it comes to a halt. And we'll have a look at all of those things a little bit later. In this movie, we're going to have a look at one. Now, we're in 0401 Squash, and if you want to follow along and you have access to the exercise files, you can open it now. Squash and stretch is one of my favourite principles of animation, and it can really add a lot of character to your animation. You'll see here we've got this bouncing ball, which looks okay, the timing's okay, but it still looks a bit rigid. To really make it come to life, we're going to use squash and stretch. Now, you may think, okay, well, we want to squash the ball here, so let's use scale. So what I do is click on the stopwatch for scale, move to here where it would be squashed, and then I would squash either the X or Y axis. A couple of problems. First of all, you'll notice that it's scaling around the anchor point. Now I'm going to undo that and show you another problem. So another problem is quite often I'll want to have auto orient switched on. And auto orient will allow the ball to change direction as it travels. If I choose orient along path and click OK, you'll see that it now changes direction as it travels, and that looks really good. But the problem is, you'll notice that the ball, when I squash it on the y-axis, is actually squashing it horizontally and vice versa, and because it travels around, those values will be different depending on how the ball is moving. So what we're going to do is we're going to use a little trick, which is to use the transform effect. So we're going to go to transform in the effects and presets panel, and I'm going to apply that to the basketball. And it allows me to reset the anchor point. So at the moment it's 8585, which is in the center of the object. I'm going to right click on there and choose edit value. I'm going to change the units of measurement to percentage of source, and I'm going to change the X value to 0, and I'll show you why in a second. So if I click on OK, you might notice that the anchor point has moved to the very left hand side of our source. Now the only thing about that is if we move through to the next keyframe, it works really well because it's at the bottom at this point, which is what I want, because it's rotated around to make the anchor point at the bottom. The only thing is it's moved the ball up. So what we also need to do is change the position value to 0. And once they're both at 0, the anchor point will be down here, but the ball will be positioned just where we want it. A little bit complicated, but it works for squash and stretch. I'm then going to remove uniform scale, and if I adjust the width, it should squash it down. So I'm going to squash it down to 50%. Now, if you're going to squash by 50%, you also need to stretch by 50%. So I'm going to go to 150. Squash and stretch should be even. So if it goes down by 50, the other axis should go up by 50 to make the volume remain the same and make it seem believable. Okay, we're going to keyframe the scale height and the scale width. Now, don't get confused with the scale property down here in the timeline. If you want to be sure, just hit E to open up your effects and open up scale width and scale height. Now, I'm just quickly going to go down to my transform property group, and I'm just going to switch off the graphs for position and scale so that I'm not getting confused between them. And now I can just see the graphs for scale height and scale width. Now, it's difficult for me to know where to add my keyframes. So temporarily, let's go back down, switch on position, and now I can just draw the keyframes where I need them using the pen tool. So I'll draw a keyframe there, and then another one there, one there, one there. So I want one at the arc, top of the arc of each move, and where the ball hits the ground. Now I can switch off that graph, and I still have a clear indication of where I need to add my points. Now I'm going to switch on the graph buttons for both of these so I can see both properties at the same time, and now I can add these for my scale height. Okay, just making sure they're in the right place. So we've got a keyframe here for 150 and 50, which is correct, and then we'll need another one here for the same. So we've already keyframed that, and we've already got one there for that. So the only ones we need to change are that one, and that one, the ones at the top of the arc. So at the top of the arc, these should swap around. So this one should be 50 and this one should be 150. And you'll see it creates quite a distinctive graph over here. And it's very easy once we've done that just to go back to the selection tool and think, right, okay, all I've got to do is swap every second one. So I drag that down to there and the other one up. Now you can grab them both simultaneously, and then you can use the free transform box. If you hold down the command key as you drag, it will swap them round. And of course you can snap if you've got snapping on. Okay, so that's a nice way of doing it. Just select them, hold down the command key or control key on Windows, and just drag them to swap them. Okay, so now we should have squash, stretch, squash, stretch, squash. So you'll see that using a combination of the transform effect and the graph editor is a really quick and easy way of adding a squash and stretch effect. Obviously this is cheating. Really, you should hand draw the squash and stretch effect, or you can use other distortion tools, like you could use the puppet tool, for example, to squash and stretch your objects. But this is a quick and easy way of squashing and stretching a ball. So exaggeration is literally a method of emphasizing something to increase its significance or draw attention to it. Exaggeration in animation terms is used to emphasize whatever key idea or feeling you wish to portray. For example, if you animate a character smoking a cigarette while dancing, you should exaggerate the action that's most relevant to the scene. So if the animation's purpose is to illustrate the joys of dancing, maybe the cigarette's there just to suggest that the character's in a bar somewhere, the dancing should be exaggerated. If, however, you want to focus on the fact the character is smoking, maybe an anti-smoking ad, you would make him smoke in a very ostentatious way, with his feet making tiny little dancing movements. By exaggerating certain elements, you can guide the viewer's eyes and give them the exact message that you wish to give. Using our bouncing ball example again, if we squash the ball and stretch it, we can exaggerate the squash and stretch and the pause as it touches the ground and reaches the top of the arc. And that's what we're going to do here. By exaggerating these elements, we'll be able to draw the viewer's attention and make sure that nothing's missed. So let's have a look at what we've got. So I'm going to hit U on the keyboard to open up my keyframes. And here you'll see the keyframe. So hits the ground here, and then it starts to stretch. And then we've added a keyframe in here. Okay. And then it squashes again, and then up at the top I've added a keyframe. So what we're going to do at these points here is I'm going to change the height and the width. So I'm just going to change the height to 100 and the width to 100. So it forms a normal shape at the top of the arc. I'm then going to do the same here. So let's change that to 100, 100. Okay, and we should also do the same here at the top. I think that's already at 100, so we'll just leave that as it is. Now, if we have a look at the graph that's created from that and just zoom in, so I'm going to zoom in around this graph, and you'll see I've done a fair bit of work on the timing already on this. As it hits the top, we want to make sure that pauses for a while. And this is a case where you would use easy ease. So if I click on easy ease, that just gives it an ease. And then I can just stretch the influence handles out as far as I can just to exaggerate that ease. Now I've done it for the width. I also want to do it for the height, so I'm going to do the same there. Drag the ease out as far as I can, and we'll do the same here on this keyframe. This is the top of this arc. Okay, that one's already dragged out. We'll drag that one out. Okay, and by doing this, we're just exaggerating the way it holds at the top of each arc. Now, we've probably overdone it a bit, but you'll see how it works in a minute. Of course, we can exaggerate that even more if I select all of these keyframes, making sure that free transform is on. I could just move them further apart. And then if I come over here, I could just select those keyframes, copy and paste. Okay, so I could also toggle hold that so that we don't get any changes in between. So let's do the same over here. Let's move that across. We'll select these keyframes, move them further out, move to here, select those keyframes, copy paste, and then toggle hold just to get rid of this little rascal. And if we preview that, we should have a much more exaggerated scale and height now. Okay, now that's just the scale and height. So we need to do position as well. So select position, and if we have a look, obviously they don't line up anymore. So really I should have done that along with the other, but if I just pull that out to there, And we have a little look at that. Okay, you see we're getting a much nicer effect as it kind of holds up there. Now, if I want to make it hold position as well, what I'm going to do is grab the pen tool and just add my little points where I want them. So I want one here at the top of this arc and one here at the top of this arc, and then select them both. And in this situation, I can easy ease because I just want them to stop moving for a sec. And then it's just a case of dragging the handles out to match the other effects. So once you get used to using the speed graph, it's a really powerful way of being able to adjust the timing of your animations. This is probably way too much exaggeration. So you can see it's actually stopping at the peak of each one. So I'm just going to undo that. And this is just with a normal easy ease. If easy ease is too much, you can just drag it up a little bit to match the other effects. And that way it will keep moving. Okay, but you're still getting that little hold. Again, you can adjust the influence curves as well. And of course you could preview while it's changing. So have a little play with the speed graphs and think about exaggerating some of the movements.
Into the machine learning model. Best is being fed more pixels than standard, but my computer's pretty good, so I'm going to keep it on best. Under propagation, you can set and view the search radius or enable classic controls, but honestly, I'm just going to leave this at default. You can fine-tune your roto brush mat, but I highly recommend using these controls after you've completed the roto because it's much easier to manage. Same with motion blur and edge colors, which we'll come back to later. And that's it, pretty simple. So now I think it's time to roto. So I'm going to click into my timeline at frame 1, then hold down Control and hit the right arrow key to move frame by frame and roto. Brush will start propagating each frame as I continue through the shot. And guys, we're doing this in real time. There's no movie magic. You can see how well this thing is actually working. So as I'm moving along, I'm just going to be looking out for any weird imperfections that may happen. And if I see one, just like this, I'll zoom in, paint out the mistake, then continue on my way. Honestly, this is looking insanely good so far. I've barely had to touch anything or correct any mistakes. And now I'm done. Insane. That took like no time at all. While you're working on your roto, you have some interesting view controls right here underneath the frame. You have toggle alpha, alpha bound, boundary, or alpha overlay, where you can select the background color as well. All right, I'm really happy with this. So now it's time to freeze our roto, which is basically going to tell After Effects to save and protect your rotoscope. And just like that, if we click back into our composition, we have extracted our guy from our scene with elegance and grace. Now we have the opportunity to fine-tune our roto brush matte. Feather will obviously feather and soften the edges. Contrast will determine how hard or soft the edge actually is. Shift edge will give you some positive or negative bleed on your subject. And reduce chatter will smooth out any random small imperfections in your roto. Since my subject is moving, I will turn on motion blur, and if you want, you can turn on decontaminate edge colors, which looks interesting, but for this scene probably isn't necessary. I think this is only useful if you have edge color background bleed, which we don't have, so I'm not going to use it. And now I'm going to duplicate my layer, delete roto brush off the bottom layer, and now we have layer separation for us to put our text message bubble behind. I'm going to quickly whip up a graphic, animate it a little bit, and now we have successfully inserted this graphic into our video, and it took literally no time at all. Honestly, if I had to frame by frame mask this scene to do what we just did, I'd quit, for sure, I'm out. If you need to make any changes to your roto for any reason, you can double click back into your layer, unfreeze it, make the necessary changes, then freeze it again. For those of you working with subjects with frizzy hair or super fine details, you can long click and hold on the roto brush icon to bring up the refine edge brush and paint over your fine edge, making sure to keep the brush straddling your line. In your view mode, make sure X-ray is selected so you can really see the finite detail that you're grabbing. Now, same process, go frame by frame, remove any mistakes by holding down Alt or Option, let it propagate, freeze the roto, then fine-tune the refine edge brush just like your roto matte, but with separate controls. Not everyone will need to or want to use the refine edge brush, but it tends to get overlooked, and honestly, that's pretty sad because it's pretty awesome. Okay, let me guess, you're probably wanting a comparison of the same piece of video using roto brush 1 instead of roto brush 2. Am I in the right ballpark? Here I'm using roto brush V1 and I was following the same rules. Individual strokes, being careful not to select the background as my foreground and vice versa. And once I got to a decent base frame I was happy with, I toggled over one frame and it instantly started losing detail in multiple parts of my frame. So I did a lot of correction strokes, and after I corrected all of it on frame 3, same thing. I was spending so much time making corrections that I eventually just gave up and tried to chunk through the roto, and even with the fine tuning, this is the result it came back with. It's disgusting, and I spent twice as long on this and gave up halfway through. Let me guess, that's probably not enough for you. You're also wanting to see roto brush 1 and roto brush 2 side by side on the same screen. The need for intervention, better at capturing minus is background. Also, if you hold down Control and click and drag up and down, you can change the size of your brush for really getting into some of those tight corners. Now here's a pro tip. You're absolutely going to want to spend as much time as possible on your base frame because Roto Brush 2 bases everything standard, but my computer's pretty good, so I'm going to keep it on best. Under propagation, you can set and view the search radius or enable classic controls, but honestly, I'm just going to leave this at default. You can fine-tune your roto brush mat, but I highly recommend using these controls after you've completed the roto because it's much easier to manage. Same with motion blur and edge colors, which we'll come back to later. And that's it, pretty simple. So now I think it's time to roto. So I'm gonna click into my timeline at frame 1, then hold down Control and hit the right arrow key to move frame by frame, and Roto Brush will start propagating each frame as I continue through the shot. And guys, we're doing this in real time. There's no movie magic. You can see how well this thing is actually working. So as I'm moving along, I'm just going to be looking out for any weird imperfections that may happen. And if I see one, just like this, I'll zoom in, paint out the mistake, then continue on my way. Honestly, this is looking insanely good so far. I've barely had to touch anything or correct any mistakes. And now I'm done. Insane. That took like no time at all. While you're working on your roto, you have some interesting view controls right here underneath the frame. You have toggle alpha, alpha boundary, or alpha overlay, where you can select the background color as well. All right, I'm really happy with this. So now it's time to freeze our roto, which is basically going to tell After Effects to save and protect your rotoscope. And just like that, if we click back into our composition, we have extracted our guy from our scene with elegance and grace. Now we have the opportunity to fine-tune our roto brush mat. Feather will obviously feather and soften the edges. Contrast will determine how hard or soft the edge actually is. Shift edge will give you some positive or negative bleed on your subject. And reduce chatter will smooth out any random small imperfections in your roto. Since my subject is moving, I will turn on motion blur, and if you want, you can turn on decontaminate edge colors, which looks interesting, but for this scene probably isn't necessary. I think this is only useful if you have edge color background bleed, which we don't have, so I'm not going to use it. And now I'm going to duplicate my layer, delete roto brush off the bottom layer, and now we have layer separation for us to put our text message bubble behind. I'm going to quickly whip up a graphic, animate it a little bit, and now we have successfully inserted this graphic into our video, and it took literally no time at all. Honestly, if I had to frame by frame mask this scene to do what we just did, I'd quit for sure. I'm out. If you need to make any changes to your roto for any reason, you can double click back into your layer, unfreeze it, make the necessary changes, then freeze it again. For those of you working with subjects with frizzy hair or super fine details, you can long click and hold on the roto brush icon to bring up the refined edge brush and paint over your fine edge, making sure to keep the brush straddling your line. In your view mode, make sure X-ray is selected so you can really see the finite detail that you're grabbing. Now, same process, go frame by frame, remove any mistakes by holding down Alt or Option, let it propagate, freeze the roto, then fine-tune the refined edge brush just like your roto mat, but with separate controls. Not everyone will need to or want to use the refined edge brush, but it tends to get overlooked, and honestly, that's pretty sad because it's pretty awesome. Okay, let me guess. You're probably wanting a comparison of the same piece of video using RotoBrush 1 instead of RotoBrush 2. Am I in the right ballpark? Here I'm using RotoBrush V1 and I was following the same rules. Individual strokes, being careful not to select the background as my foreground and vice versa. And once I got to a decent base frame I was happy with, I toggled over one frame and it instantly started losing detail in multiple parts of my frame. So I did a lot of correction strokes, and after I corrected all of it on frame 3, same thing. I was spending so much time making corrections that I eventually just gave up and tried to chunk through the roto, and even with the fine tuning, this is the result it came back with. It's disgusting, and I spent twice as long on this and gave up halfway through. Let me guess, that's probably not enough for you. You're also wanting to see RotoBrush 1 and RotoBrush 2 side by side on the same screen. Okay, roll it. Okay, without question, RotoBrush 2 is clearly superior. The sequel is better than the original. So technically, the biggest difference between RotoBrush 1 and RotoBrush 2 is the algorithm that is being used in After Effects. Version 1 is a non-machine learning algorithm, where version 2 is, you guessed it, machine learning. Adobe Sensei machine learning to be exact, which helps generate more accurate mattes when separating foreground and background elements in video sequences. RotoBrush 2 is also better at adapting to changes without the need for intervention, better at capturing edges, and utilizes GPU instead of CPU, so if you've got a decent graphics card, you'll 100% notice the difference. Now with all the free time you're going to have after using RotoBrush 2, you can do some selective color adjustments, replicates, comp them into another scene completely, hell, roto a completely different scene since you have that much free time on your hands. Maybe now is the time you can finally realize your lifelong dream of making Snoop Dogg memes. People will be so impressed by you thinking you're working so hard and so long doing all this stuff, but really, you're just painting, having a good time, and letting After Effects machine learning algorithms do their thing. Give yourselves a round of applause. You deserve it. And that's it, guys. I don't know what else to say. RotoBrush 2, the sequel, better than the original, saves a lot of time, really fun and fast to use. Sign me up. Well, I've been signed up for a little bit, but you can sign up by downloading the beta release of After Effects from the Creative Cloud app right now. All right, get out of here. Go play with RotoBrush 2. Thank you so much for watching this video. If you enjoyed it, definitely give it a thumbs up. And also thank you, Adobe After Effects, for hitting me up and giving me the opportunity to make this video. It's been an honor. I love you guys. I love you guys too. If you haven't already, please make sure you subscribe to the channel and also check out the last video that you missed. I don't know what the cadence is anymore. Quarantine's really starting to, to set in a little bit. I do them whenever I want. I've been working on a lot of stuff with Adobe. But anyway, subscribe, check out the last video, and I will see you next time.
Have I ever told you guys how much I hate rotoscoping? If you don't know what rotoscoping is, it's when you isolate a section of your clip so that you can put stuff behind it. I talked about it in my last After Effects video, which you guys seem to have really liked. Typically it is done with masking. There's a few ways to do it. You can either draw a mask around the whole subject, or you can draw and track masks around portions of your subject. And then within like the last 5-6 years maybe, After Effects introduced the rotoscope brush, which essentially just allowed you to paint out the thing you want to rotoscope, and then the software would automatically track your subject. It's been super handy, but sometimes it doesn't work as well as you want it to. But recently, After Effects has released the Rotoscope Brush 2, available in the beta software. I have seen some pretty insane results with this tool. It now uses AI to analyze your image and try and track your subject better. Previously, it would just look at pixel movement, but now it seems like they're introducing like an image recognition. At least that's what it seems like. Anyways, I want to give this thing a shot and see if it works as well as the internet tells me. The only problem is I don't have any footage. So I thought, why don't we make a VFX video using this new tool? Now, the hardest part with VFX is coming up with the idea. This right here is one of my favorite VFX videos I've ever made. I just think it turned out really well and looks so clean. So I thought, why don't we try and recreate this video? I remember when I made this video, there was so much tedious masking that happened, and it took me hours to mask out my hand. So I thought, why don't we try and recreate this video with the updated RotoBrush 2.0.
It's my friend Jesse.
Hey.
He's the only guy now with the soccer ball.
Yep, only person in Canada too, dude.
All right, let's start painting. So I'm just gonna do good rough paint here. Good, now I'm gonna hold down Alt and get in between my fingers here, cut out the grass, this hole between my hands. I've heard that the first brush is the most important, the first frame that you brush out is the most important. So I'm gonna keep that in mind right now. I might have to mess with the settings, but for now, I think that should give the software a bit of an idea of what is the hand. Now, I'm also going to just draw a red line around everything, hoping that that'll do something. I don't know. And why don't we go along here with the refine brush? Anyways, let's just hit 0 on the number pad and see what happens. I'm waiting. Oh. Okay. So immediately the mask picked up that my hand left frame and came back in, so that's pretty good. Maybe I shouldn't have done that refine edge tool. Okay. Not bad. Yeah, I expected that the blurry parts of my hand were gonna get cut out. Luckily, in this scenario, because we're going to put the hand exactly where the hand is anyways, the roto doesn't need to be perfect here. Like, this could have been done with a good mask, but my thought was if I need to reposition the hand, a good roto is going to be super helpful. But in this case, I don't think I'm going to. So it's looking pretty good. It's quicker than the old roto and seems to be a lot more reliable. I think they've done a lot more than just this new image recognition AI thing. I'm honestly probably not even using this tool correctly to its capacity, but doing the job right now. Yeah, I'm honestly more impressed at the smoothness, because I found before that it's just so buggy. Now, that being said, I'm usually working on red footage, which is a lot heavier in After Effects. It'll play back smooth, but then once you start doing effects, it can really chug. Like right here, that's looking real clean up until there. All right, that's looking good. It's not really liking these couple frames, but I think that's understandable. Cool. Let's freeze that, I think. When you freeze your roto brush, it prevents any more analyzing of those frames. So now I'm pretty sure we can still affect all the properties, but it's not going to try and reanalyze your pixels. Okay, like that's pretty sweet. Yeah, let's just mess around with some of these settings though. I'm going to add a bit of a feather and edge shift. It's going to blend with the background anyways. I pull this up, it's going to blend very well. So I just want to get rid of any mistakes, go through maybe. I'm going to speed through the next portion of this because honestly, I'm not really sure what I'm doing. So I'm going to mess around with it and get it to a place where I like. And then we're going to together go through the rest of this edit. Okay, that's looking a lot more clean. I'm just going to freeze this again. All right, that's looking solid. So it's just this balance of messing with your properties, but then also readjusting your rotoscope and going back and forth between the two. We're really putting this new Rotobrush 2.0 through its paces right now. Whoa, what is going on there? Again, I think if we did this with a person, like a full body person, it would make a big difference. But what just happened? That just fell apart. Okay, clearly I must have done something wrong. It's like I tried to adjust like 3 or 4 frames and then the rest of the animation was just like, yeah, no, I'm good. Well, that's annoying. What is going on? Like everything was fine and then it just fell apart. I might just have to start over. This is rough. It's weird. It'll like process, but then as soon as I freeze, it all falls apart. I think I'm gonna also mask out that one part that wasn't looking too hot. I'm gonna duplicate my hand and then delete the rotor brush. And then just on the tip of my finger here where it gets.
Hey everyone, here from Tunnel Vision TV, and in today's tutorial I'm going to show you guys how to use the rotor brush in After Effects. So first of all, I'm going to drag my clip onto a new composition. So let's say we want to roto this guy out. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to double click on my clip to open that into a new tab here. And then this little icon here, the little character with a brush, that's your rotor brush. And then under your brushes here on the side, you can obviously set the size of your brush. So I'm going to select something quite big, maybe about 19. You can resize it with a diameter here. And let's make it bigger, maybe something like 40. And then I'm just going to start drawing around the lines where I want to create that roto. So I want to roto everything out here and also the top of this pot. And if you go over the lines, like say this little section here at the top and also in the middle, what you can do is you can hold in Alt on your keyboard, and then you can just draw over those sections to basically invert that area. Same here at the top, so just hold in Alt, and there we go. And then I'm just going to carry on and try and just paint in everything that I want to roto. So this whole area of the face I want to roto out, and then also this part here. So I'm just going to draw some lines here, same on this side, and this area here, and some other hair. And I want to invert the section in the middle, so I'm going to do an Alt and just draw a little circle there and then correct it. And once you kind of happy with the results, you can click on this toggle alpha overlay just to get a quick preview and see if your mask is looking okay. So that's looking all right. Let's just make sure this is all colored in. We've got a bit of an issue here, so I'm going to do Alt and just draw over that. So that's looking fine. And then what you need to do, you need to extend this spanning section here at the bottom, these little arrows. So just go to the side and just drag that out because we want to roto brush this entire clip. So make sure you're on frame 1, and then we're going to press space to start track forward. Right, so once that's done, just play through it a couple of times to make sure that your roto is good and that you're happy with your roto. And then we need to freeze the roto. So here at the bottom, you've got a freeze button. So just click that, and that's going to go through all the frames and just freeze that mask.
an element out of its background or remove it from the background, you'll want to use a layer mask. And in this video, we're going to do just that. We'll isolate this shark from the ocean background and insert it over top of some graphic elements here. So I'll make sure the visibility of layer 1 is on, and I'll select layer 1, and I'll grab my current time indicator and scrub in the timeline, and you can see that we're working with video. Let's create a still frame since we only need a still of the shark over our graphic. I'll move my current time indicator to where my marker says freeze at 2 seconds in the timeline out of the tool panel. I'm going to click and hold because around to change how the mask moves between each one of these anchor points. And more importantly, it also controls how the path actually moves through each anchor point. So let's go to the nose here and click and drag. And you'll notice, and again, it's fine that the path is off the shape because we're going to go back and refine to refine the shape. And then I'll just fast forward through all the fine point. It brings up both those handles. Now, I can click on that one handle, and that's going to break the translation between these two handles. So I'm going to hold down Alt or Option, and I'll just fine tune the movement of the path over this one little point. I can do the same thing here, holding Alt or Option. Now, if you hold down Alt or Option and then click on a path, it'll change it from having handles to not having handles. So I want you to feel free to go through and fine tune the mask and make your adjustments, making sure you notice the difference between just clicking and dragging directly on a point versus clicking and dragging while holding the Alt or Option key down to get a more refined adjustment for the path over that specific area. And I'll rejoin you here in just a few. All right, once you have something you like, go back up to the tool panel and grab the selection tool, and then you can click directly on layer 1, and I'll press the comma key to zoom out, and I'll just click on the shark and reposition it within the scene. So you can see, once you need to isolate an element out of its background, if it's a rather complex shape, you definitely want to use the pen tool.
What's going on, my friends? Welcome back to another tutorial. Today we're going to be breaking down Schoolboy Q featuring 21 Savage floating music video that just dropped recently, as well as we're going to hop into Premiere and After Effects. I'm going to show you step by step how you can recreate some of these cool effects shown. I just want to mention that it's directed by Jack Beggert and Dave Free. Jack Beggert, one of my favorite music video directors, so I'll leave a link to his website below if you want to check out some of his other stuff. I think I'm going to title this tutorial video Create a Movement for Music Videos, because as you're going to see as I press play here, they have this really consistent, cool looking jittery effect going through that really drives the whole video. So I'm going to talk about that, show you how to do that, but I'll also show you some of the other effects that go on. So it might be happening a little bit too fast, so let's just rewind a bit. You might not have caught it, but this little effect that we have going on with the car, this is actually the same effect that was used in that Drake and Travis Scott Sicko Mode music video where it's locked onto Drake's face. It was also used in that new, I think it was like a Beats headphone commercial with LeBron where they lock onto the headphone in people's ear as it's running. You get this really cool locked on effect. I'm going to show you how to do that. I've talked about that before in After Effects. It's actually pretty simple. Throughout the rest of the video, you get all these cool zooming in and outs and this choppy kind of broken down look. Now, I'm not playing the music just so there's no copyright violations, but we can still break down the video. This is pretty normal here. They probably use some masking to kind of get the other people in the background to be jittering, using speed ramping to isolate the subject here. Now, we're going to talk a little bit about motion control throughout this video and ways you can use motion control at an advanced level to maybe at a beginner level, create some interesting shots that you'll see throughout this. But like I said, we want to keep it brief, so let's move along here. Now, the effects aren't what makes this a great video. What makes this a great video is the planning of the shots and the transitions. And if there's anything I want you to take away from this video, it's not the tutorial you'll see after this, it's just the way they're able to pull off these seamless transitions and things that make sense and make the video flow as a whole within the edit. That's one of the most important things you guys should take away from this. So let me show you some examples here. We're going to press play, and I know everything's happening a little bit fast and jittering, but this is a perfect example of a seamless transition where one shot flows perfectly into the next. Now you can do this like this by just matching up the subjects, like for example zooming in on someone's face. But as you see, if I go frame by frame, this is one shot, this is the second shot, and it's just an easy seamless transition just like that. Now it's pretty easy to do that with anything like a subject all the way to shapes. I think I'm going to make a full tutorial talking more about this because it's something very important in making a video flow and making it look really good. So like I said, this happens very fast, but we'll try and play through. You have the camera panning to the inside of the dashboard, and then we have a zoom from the dashboard. As you can see, you have masking, and then you can see the mirror here. Keep in mind, keep an eye on that. As we zoom out, a little piece of that mirror is cropped into this next shot of the car. So that's how we can keep that flow feeling very organic, like you're really being pulled away from the inside of the car and seeing the outside of the car just like this. So something like that is just really smart planning, really good editing. That's what makes this flow very well. We pan over to all these buildings. Now this could have been created in some sort of 3D software, or it could have been put together using compositing to create the building like this. But essentially what it does is it brings us into our next scene, which is just a built set scene. And the cool thing about this scene right here is they use motion control. So what a motion control device is, it's something where you place the camera on it and then you use built-in software to be able to record a specific movement of the machine with the camera on top of it. Once you have that movement recorded, you can play that over and over and over, so that every single shot your camera will be doing the exact precise movement every single time. So for example, what they would do is you have your set here, you would tell all the extras, the girls, to go jump on the bed, do all this crazy stuff in one scene, and that's it, cut. You would have one scene of him by himself dancing, cut that scene. You would have one scene of maybe these girls on the left dancing. Since every single one of the camera movements in all of those shots you just took are exactly the same from the motion control, you can use masking to just pop them in and out of the scene just like that. It's very simple. I'll leave some tutorials down below if you guys are more interested within that. But we have some cool stuff going on here with zooming out. This zoom could have been done with motion control in the camera to make it kind of pan out like that, or done with After Effects cameras in post. And then we have some cool kind of jitteriness with the building that they put together from scratch. Now I'm guessing they took a time lapse of a building and then they applied the same exact effect, and then probably went in with a lot of grueling details to create this scene as a whole. I love what they did here with the window, where they probably green screened somebody hanging out of the window, where they probably green screen somebody being held outside of the window. I thought that was a cool idea. So I showed you the main gist of the video. Let's hop into Premiere and let me show you how we can recreate.
Hey, this is Matt with Blue Mantle Films. Today we're talking about how you can remove objects from video.
Hey, what's up guys, it's Tech Confusion, and today I'm going to show you how to remove objects from video using After Effects. Let's jump right in. Now before we get started, let me just say this doesn't work on every single video clip. I've noticed if the object or person is in front of a very detailed texture, such as this grass here, it has a harder time figuring out what should go in its place, and it just doesn't look completely natural. That being said, for such a complex scene as this, it didn't do half bad. Just remember, the more simple the background, the less noticeable this content-aware fill feature will be. Alright, so to begin, you'll need to drag your footage into your composition timeline. And then we're going to grab our pen tool from this tool tray up here, or press G on your keyboard. Before drawing a mask around the object or person, make sure your playhead is at the beginning of your composition timeline. Now begin to draw a mask around the object you want to remove. This doesn't have to be a perfect mask, but it's good to get it as accurate and as close as possible. When you're done with the mask, toggle the drop down on your video layer and find masks. Let's set our mask to subtract rather than add so that this person is masked out. Then click on the stopwatch next to mask path. Now we're going to advance forward on our timeline, and here I'm using the page up and page down keys to go frame by frame. So keep going until you see your object appear from underneath the mask, and then just move the mask to cover your object. Just do this for the remainder of the clip or until your subject is off frame. I'm just going to speed this part up as this is a very repetitive process. So when your object goes completely out of frame, take this blue handle over here on the right side and drag it right to that point on the timeline. What you're doing is trimming your work area so your computer doesn't have to process the full clip if the object you're trying to remove is just in a part of the clip. Then once you have your mask tracking your object, we need to open up the Content Aware Fill window. And just like any other panel, you can access this by going to Window in your toolbar and clicking on Content Aware Fill. So now let's go ahead and head over to our Content Aware Fill panel. Under Fill Method, you'll most likely want to select Object. Now the object setting is good at removing moving objects where a lot of detail is required, and Surface would be good for something like removing a logo from the back of a laptop. So for this shot, I'm going to select Object. Now under Range, you'll see that it says Work Area, and this is why we trimmed our work area earlier. Having a smaller work area will speed up this Content Aware Fill process. Now just click on Generate Fill Layer. If you haven't already saved your After Effects project, it's going to pop up with a box asking you where you want to save it prior to running the process. Just choose a place to save and wait for it to finish. It will take quite a bit, however, it's truly amazing what it's doing in the background. What used to take hours and hours now just takes minutes. As you can see, when it's done, you can play back your footage and the object is completely gone. Now, like I said, this isn't complete magic. There are going to be clips that are impossible for After Effects to remove an object from. However, if you're in a pinch and really need to remove something, it's definitely worth a try to use this feature. Now, there are ways to improve this feature by creating a reference frame, which is also an option on the Content Aware panel, as you can see here. However, that takes a little bit more advanced skill and some knowledge about Photoshop, so I'm not going to go quite into that in this video. However, just know that that option is there if After Effects seems to be struggling on the video you'd like to remove an object from. Now I'm going to do one more clip here, and I'm just going to try to remove this drone from this shot. I'm going to create a quick mask around it, set the mask to subtract, and toggle the stopwatch for mask path. Then I'm going to advance forward and mask out the drone. Alright, now heading over to the Content Aware Fill panel, I'm going to select Generate Fill Layer and wait for it to complete. As you can see here, for the most part it did a great job at finding what to replace, and I'm pretty happy with the results. There's a little spot up in the clouds right up here where you can kind of see it at work, and I'm sure if I tweaked it a little more I could probably smooth all that out, but really this is quite impressive. Anyways guys, that's all for this video. I hope it helped you, and if it did, please remember to leave a like, and don't forget to comment, subscribe, and hit that bell icon so you don't miss more videos like this. I hope you have a great rest of your day, and until next time guys, peace out.